Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to join the webinar today. As His Excellency has just mentioned, today marks the 24th anniversary of Hong Kong's return to our motherland. The Hong Kong SAR is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. We are a local administrative region that enjoys a high degree of autonomy under one country, two systems, and comes under the central people's government directly. No one, I emphasize, no one is more committed to the one country, two systems principle than the central people's government. Time and again, the central government has made it clear that it will unswervingly implement the one country, two systems, which has proven to be the best institutional arrangements to ensure Hong Kong's long-term prosperity and stability, and to serve the fundamental interests of the nation. The legal basis for implementing the one country, two systems is the Constitution of the People's Republic of China and the Basic Law, and not, I emphasize, not as someone would like you to believe, the Sino-Joint British Declaration. As our Ministry of Foreign Affairs has stressed time and again, the Sino-British Joint Declaration stipulated the resumption of exercise of sovereignty by China over Hong Kong and the relevant arrangements during the transition period. The basic policies regarding Hong Kong declared by China in Joint Declaration were China's statement of policies and commitment to the United Kingdom, or not commitment to the United Kingdom, nor an international obligation as some would like to claim. National security is the cornerstone of national stability and the bedrock of people's well-being. Safeguarding national security is the top priority of every country around the world. A year ago, the law of the People's Republic of China on safeguarding national security in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region was enacted. The purpose is to address the increasing threat to national security in Hong Kong posed by the escalating violence by rioters during the social unrest, which lasted for about a year since mid-2019. Like the national security laws of any country around the world, it makes cessation, subversion, terrorist activities, and collusion with foreign forces to endanger national security a crime. The civil unrest in Hong Kong has since subsided. Street violence has substantially reduced. External interference appears to have diminished. The national security legislation has effectively restored stability in our society, and Hong Kong is now getting on its feet again. As countries around the world all have their national security laws, it is therefore inconceivable to us that our national security law should be a cause for concern for some politicians in overseas countries. National security is strictly a matter within the purview of the central government. It is the legitimate right and duty of every country to safeguard its national security. Whether it is a unitary or federal system, legislation on national security is invariably enacted by the central authorities rather than a local government. The international community should therefore be fair and not adopt a double standard. The Hong Kong National Security Law upholds the rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people, as well as the high degree of autonomy of the Hong Kong SAR. The law clearly stipulates the Hong Kong SAR shall protect the rights and freedoms enjoyed by residents under the Basic Law and the provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights as applied to Hong Kong in accordance with the law. It is a well-known principle that certain rights and freedoms recognized in the ICCPR are not absolute. The ICCPR actually stipulates that certain rights and freedoms may be subject to restrictions as prescribed by law if it is necessary in the interests of national security, public safety, public order, or the rights of freedoms in other citizens. The rule of law is the cornerstone of Hong Kong, which practices common law. Any law enforcement action taken by Hong Kong enforcement agencies must be based on facts and evidence, and strictly in accordance with due process prescribed in the law, regardless of the political stance and occupational background of the suspects. We are therefore rightfully appalled by the hypocrisy and irresponsible remarks of some foreign governments and politicians, which seems to suggest that criminal elements of certain political inclination or occupational background are above the law and immune from legal sanctions. The Hong Kong SAR government is a staunch supporter of the freedom of speech and press freedom, but these freedoms must be exercised within the remits of the law. Hence, foreign governments and politicians will be getting nowhere by making false and malicious allegations against Hong Kong SAR for our recent enforcement actions against suspected criminals who happens to have a media or journalistic background. The frequency, intensity, and organization of these unfounded accusations give us good reason to believe that it's nothing more than a ploy of some foreign government to destabilize Hong Kong. National security and political security are inseparable. In recent years, local extremists advocated Hong Kong independence, organized resistance against the government of the central government, and even collude with external elements to interfere with Hong Kong's affairs. Some of these extremist elements have entered the political structure of Hong Kong SAR through public election. They have since paralyzed the operation of the Legislative Council and obstructed governance by the Hong Kong SAR. They supported and glorified violence inside and outside our legislature. They devised plans to gain dominance in the council in order to achieve what they call mutual destruction, all of which, of course, would seriously jeopardize Hong Kong's constitutional order and challenged national sovereignty. On 11th March this year, National People's Congress passed the decision on improving the electoral system of Hong Kong SAR. The central government took the initiative from the national level to improve the electoral system of the Hong Kong SAR. The purpose is to plug the loopholes and eliminate deficiencies of the existing electoral system. We must stress that the improvement to our electoral system is both timely and necessary, as anti-China forces had created chaos in the Legislative Council, paralyzed the operation of the government, and even colluded with external forces to undermine Hong Kong's security and interests. No country and government could turn a blind eye to such dangers. The improvement of our electoral laws aim at plugging loopholes and fixing systemic flaws. The ultimate objective is to promote one country, two systems and safeguard national security. Through constructing a democratic system that is consistent with the actual situation of Hong Kong, fully conforms to the constitutional order under the one country, two systems principle, and manifests Hong Kong's characteristics, we can put Hong Kong back on track and make ratifications. The amendment to the electoral system embodies 5 key principles. First, safeguarding our country's sovereignty, national security, and development interests. Second, fully implementing the principle of patriots administering Hong Kong and to lay down institutional safeguards to the implementation of one country, two systems. Third, strengthening the representativeness of our election committee and the Legislative Council, broadening the balance and orderly political participation. Fourth, strengthening the effective collaboration between the administration and the legislature, thereby enhancing the governance capability of the government. And finally, upholding Hong Kong SAR residents' the right to vote and the right to stand for elections in strict accordance with the law. Pursuant to the decision, the Hong Kong SAR government enacted the Improving Electoral Systems Consolidation Amendment Ordinance 2021. In doing so, the Hong Kong SAR government not only fulfilled its constitutional responsibility to implement the improved electoral system, but also put in place institutional safeguards to ensure the actual and full application of patriots administering Hong Kong. The changes to our electoral system is a quantum leap in terms of the unprecedented broad coverage and balanced composition of public voices in the Electoral Committee and consequently the Legislative Council compared with previous terms. Business leaders, grassroots citizens, representatives from neighborhood committees, representatives of associations of Hong Kong residents in the mainland, and Hong Kong representatives in relevant national organizations are now added to the election committee composition. With increasing collaboration with and integration of Hong Kong into the mainland in respect of the Greater Bay Area development and the 14th five-year program, local voices embodying national interests relevant to Hong Kong must be included in our electoral base, mirroring our political reality under the one country, two systems principle. We believe the improved Legislative Council will be restored to a platform for rational interaction between the government and the legislature. The constitutional function of the legislature under the Basic Law can be more effectively fulfilled and implemented, thereby enhancing efficacy of the Hong Kong government's governance, and jointly, we safeguard the national security, sovereignty, and the development interests of our country. The Basic Law provides that universal suffrage must be achieved through gradual and orderly progress. That is, democratic development must not run counter to the stability and prosperity of Hong Kong, or the sovereignty or security of our nation. The way forward must be determined in the light of actual situation in Hong Kong. Since the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law, peace and stability has restored, and people in Hong Kong can continue to enjoy their basic rights and freedom in accordance with the law. Under the current stable environment, which is vitally important to the business activity of both local and overseas enterprises in Hong Kong, we have seen very favorable signs of economic recovery. The financial market and indicator for our economic outlook is the first to shoot up. Stock market capitalization has increased by over 40%. Daily turnover in the stock market has increased even more, up to 140% compared to a year ago. The Hong Kong SAR government will continue to work to fight against COVID-19, improve people's livelihood, strive for economic development, integrate Hong Kong SAR into the overall development of the country, as well as working with relevant parties in promoting the opportunities brought about by the Hong Kong, Guangdong, Macau Great Development Area and the 14th five-year plan, thereby expanding the room for development of Hong Kong young people and injecting impetus in our economic development. With order restored by the Hong Kong National Security Law and the electoral system improvements, we have every confidence to the successful implementation of the one country, two systems in Hong Kong under the full and unreserved support of the central government. Every place has its own historical, cultural, and political background. And there is no one panacea for all in respect of electoral systems and improvements to be made. We take this opportunity to urge international community to respect the country's right to safeguard national security on Hong Kong people's aspiration for stability and prosperity. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's my honor to speak here. Indeed, the 30th day of June is a special day to me because actually it is my birthday. And since last year, my birthday has another special meaning because it's the day when the Hong Kong National Security Law was promulgated for implementation in Hong Kong. Like the majority of people in Hong Kong, I was thankful for this piece of law which safeguards our interest in the absence of specific local legislation on national security. In order to understand the significance of the national security law, we need to look backwards to see what happened since 2019. For over 1 year since the middle of 2019, with the influence of external forces and propaganda by local radicals through the internet, national security risks have gradually surfaced in Hong Kong. Violence has raged across the city, with terrorist means and spread of messages advocating Hong Kong independence, self-determination, and mutual destruction in the society. The people of Hong Kong lived in a constant fear. People expressing dissenting view were seriously hurt, and their families were bullied. Politicians of different conviction had their offices seriously destroyed and received death threats. Shops and restaurants were vandalized and set on fire, and public transport systems were sabotaged. Police was also warmly blamed for their law enforcement actions and accused of unfounded indecent behavior. And more seriously than the storming of US Capitol Hill in January 2021, the Legislative Council of Hong Kong SAR was broken into, damaged, and put out of use for months. Just a copycat of the Ukraine Revolution in 2004 to 2005. It was a Hong Kong-style color revolution, which was premised on knives, hatred, and violence. As an actual threat to the governance of the Hong Kong SAR government, a small group of anti-China disruptors had all along created chaos in the Legislative Council, and more seriously, they may express collusion with foreign countries to impose sanctions on public officers and deployed to seize power through inaction, posing great security risks to the Hong Kong society and the political system. There is no doubt that if not stopped in time, such acts would endanger national sovereignty, security, and development interests of our country. It was against this background that the implementation of the Hong Kong National Security Law has been a turning point of the chaos. As a matter of fact, this piece of law has established robust legal system and enforcement mechanism for safeguarding national security in Hong Kong, and has effectively restored stability in the society and helped Hong Kong get out of the shadow of violence. The people of Hong Kong are no longer in fear and are reassured their freedom of speech and other personal rights. Shops and restaurants can operate as normal, and the Legislative Council can carry out its constitutional functions as designed under the Basic Law. And more importantly, the collusion with foreign countries have been effectively curbed, and the knives inciting hatred during the chaos have gradually been proved fake and entirely unfounded. Looking ahead, the National Security Law enabled the Hong Kong SAR government to take forward the work of safeguarding national security in Hong Kong according to the concept of holistic view of national security, and ensure that the related work is fully understood and implemented at full steam and in a holistic manner, covering various policy areas of the Hong Kong SAR, including the domains of politics, society, economy, culture, technology, internet, finance, and public health. For example, as regards the censorship of the films intentionally disseminating messages contrary to national security, the Secretary for Commerce and Economic Development has updated the guidelines for censors under the Film Censorship Ordinance to build in the condition of safeguarding national security, enabling censors, civil servants be alert to this requirement in discharging their duty. In other words, the National Security Law enables public officers to give an overhaul of all related policies in safeguarding national security. In the meantime, national security and political security, as correctly pointed out by Mr. Tang, are inseparable. To achieve genuine national security, governance must be firmly held in the hands of patriots. And with the approval of the amended Annex 1 and Annex 2 to the Basic Law by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress on March 30th this year, the Hong Kong SAR government has submitted the local laws for approving the electoral systems of the Hong Kong SAR, and which have been duly scrutinized and passed by the Legislative Council in May this year. In the wake of the illegal Occupy Central movement, the opposition forces have overcome even more burden. The radical localists have exploited the loopholes in the electoral system, got elected into the Legislative Council, and paralyzed its operation. They initiated more severe social unrest since the establishment of the Hong Kong SAR amid the saga over the proposed legislative amendments to the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance in 2019. If actual circumstances in Hong Kong are not rectified in good time, national security, social stability, and people's livelihood cannot be safeguarded, and the aim of universal suffrage will never be attainable. Improving the electoral system enables legislators and patriots who love the country and who love Hong Kong, could safeguard the national sovereignty, security, and development interests, and who would not impair Hong Kong's stability and prosperity. So long as the legislators meet these criteria, they are allowed to be critical of the government and fulfill their constitutional function and achieve good governance for the public good. In other words, improving the electoral system would restore the Legislative Council to its function as a platform for rational interaction between the executive authorities and the legislature, which enhance efficacy of governance. These have actually made today's Hong Kong SAR establishment day more fulfilling. Indeed, the two major measures taken by the central government, namely the National Security Law and the improvement of the electoral system, have filled the long-standing gaping hole of national security in Hong Kong and propped the loopholes in the existing electoral system. They stabilized the overall situation of Hong Kong and laid an important and solid foundation for the comprehensive and accurate implementation of the principles of one country, two systems. Hong Kong people administering Hong Kong and a high degree of autonomy. Without political and social stability, Hong Kong could not possibly undertake sensible economic and social development which had stalled for 2 decades. It could not even begin to resolve some of the deep-seated social problems, such as the rich-poor divide, land supply, housing shortage, and upward mobility for the young generation. It came as no surprise that business and the general public welcomed the national security law as truly reflected in the excellent performance of the stock market and the property market since implementation of the two major measures despite COVID-19. There have all along been criticisms about the two major measures implemented in Hong Kong by several established countries in the West, which are often vocal in their double standards. Ironically, they would endorse storming of the Legislative Council in Hong Kong, but condemn storming of the US Capitol Hill in January 2021. They would bring the Hong Kong police enforcement action against the riot, but fully support their police and soldiers to suppress riot following the protests of the Black Lives Matter. They will hold Hong Kong SAR government accountable to every injury case during riot, but echo Israeli bomb actions causing massive casualties in Palestine. So let me conclude by making the following remarks. I was born in Hong Kong, and I love my country and my home. The national security law and improving electoral system have stabilized the situation in Hong Kong, and our life have returned to normal. I now enjoy my good life with my family in Hong Kong, and I have every confidence that Hong Kong will continue its stability and prosperity under the one country, two systems. Thank you.
The national security law has been enacted in Hong Kong for 1 year. Together with the newly introduced electoral systems to be implemented later this year, the turmoil and the associated threat of national security due to the 2019 riots have finally come to an end. 4 months ago, I was speaking at the same occasion here, at a side event in relation to the United Nations Human Rights Council meeting. I argued that the rule of law and independence of the judiciary remained unchanged under the national security law, as already suggested by the former Chief Justice Geoffrey Ma. Human rights were well protected, and the restoration of law and order enabled Hong Kong people to return to their normal lives, free from violence, threat, and bullying. Today, these arguments still stand. First of all judges of national security law are existing Hong Kong judges, and according to Article 89 of the Basic Law, they may only be removed for inability to discharge their duties or for misbehavior. That means they could not be fired due to unpopular judgments. And in the past year, we have seen all judges remain independent in the adjudication of cases. Take the example of bail application of defendants. While Article 42 of the law set a rather high threshold of bail, stating that no bail should be granted unless the judge has sufficient grounds for believing that defendants will not continue to commit acts endangering national security. However, recently there have been cases for granting bail for some defendants by the judges. This illustrates the independence of our judges. In the last week or so, Western media were covering extensively the closure of Apple Daily and said it represented the infringement or even the demise of press freedom in Hong Kong. First of all, Hong Kong government had never ordered the closure of any media, including Apple Daily. The Hong Kong police arrested several directors and chief editors of the newspaper for national security offenses. Some assets of the company and associated businesses were frozen according to the law. The board of the newspaper decided to terminate the business last Thursday, without any governmental interference at all. But make no mistakes, Apple Daily was not and has not been a proper and decent media in Hong Kong since its establishment in 1995. That's why many Hong Kong people were celebrating, not mourning, its demise in the past week. First, Apple Daily insulted women and promoted illegal behavior, including prostitution. As a tabloid, Apple Daily has gone far beyond The Sun in the United Kingdom, which carried naked women in its famous page 3. In its early years of publication, Apple Daily included pages of experience sharing and even manuals for patronizing prostitutes. And it was widely known that companies, schools, or any decent organizations had to remove these indecent pages before displaying it at public areas. Second, Apple Daily observes no moral boundaries nor bottom line when it comes to profit making. It paid a man in Hong Kong to seek out prostitutes and pose for photographs after his wife murdered their children and committed suicide. The newspaper's making of fake news and what we called checkbook journalism tarnished its reputation and credibility. This has indeed become a classic case of indecent journalism taught in local university courses. Third, Apple Daily is the mass producer of fake news in Hong Kong. Fake news is a powerful weapon to incite people's hatred to both Hong Kong and central governments, and achieved the purpose of endangering national security in 2019. There are numerous examples which Western media would not forget. The broken-eye lady at the riot scene had proved not to be injured by police weapons. The so-called murder at the Prince Edward Underground Station, or even the rape cases within police stations, were all proved to be plain lies. Who has been propagating these fake news, which fueled the violent riots in 2019? The answer is Apple Daily. Fourth, Apple Daily is interfering with politics, even in the US. Since 2003, Apple Daily has been distributing protest banners for free along with its paper, attacking the government and leaders of both mainland China and Hong Kong. So would any decent media in the West, such as New York Times or Financial Times, conduct these acts and jeopardizing their own integrity and independence? Apple Daily was even deeply embroiled in US politics. In order to support Donald Trump's campaign, Mark Simon, the top aide of Jimmy Lai and the former CIA staff, paid for a report compiled under a fake persona, which was used to discredit Hunter Biden, the son of presidential candidate Joe Biden, ahead of the election. This kind of smear tactics and campaigns look so familiar in Hong Kong, which plays such an important role in the quarter-century history of Apple Daily. So we must ask, would any decent Western media, say Wall Street Journal or Time Magazine, condone such behavior? Therefore, it was no surprise to Hong Kong people that this paper, which called for foreign countries to launch harmful international sanctions against our country and our city, supporting Hong Kong independence, and becoming the lead fake news machine for political purposes, was accused of offenses endangering national security in Hong Kong. National security law has brought law and order, hope and confidence back to this Asia's royal city. Our lawyers and judges are independent and professional. Our government, which respects rule of law and our common law tradition, would never exert pressure on any barristers to withdraw any cases, as in the case of British Foreign Minister Dominic Raab. In January this year, Mr. Raab openly criticized Mr. David Perry, a British QC, to lead the prosecution of Jimmy Lai, which is the boss of Apple Daily, as we all know. And Mr. David Perry had to decline the job under tremendous pressure. Such governmental interference of a barrister's involvement in a court case is totally unacceptable in common law jurisdictions like Hong Kong. Recently, Western countries, including British government, have been accusing China of violating Sino-British Joint Declaration. Unfortunately, they have never indicated which clause was violated. In fact, Chinese government has fulfilled all its obligations in 1997, and universal suffrage, as the final goal of our political system, was mentioned in the Basic Law, not the Joint Declaration. Today is July 1st, which has triple meaning for Hong Kong. Besides the anniversary of the National Security Law, it also marked the 24th anniversary of Hong Kong's reunification to the country, and also the centenary celebration of the Communist Party of China. Hong Kong people are confident that despite all sorts of unsubstantiated accusations from some Western countries, one country, two systems remain the best political arrangements for Hong Kong and also China, and it will continue to bring prosperity and stability to this city. Thank you.
In August the 7th of last year, the US Department of the Treasury imposed sanctions on 11 officials from our central and Hong Kong government, alleging them for undermining Hong Kong's autonomy and infringing on Hong Kong people's right by imposing the national security law. As a native Hong Konger, born and raised here in Hong Kong, today I just want to share with you what I think about this legislation and some of the results we have seen this past year. Now, 2 years ago, under foreign influence, rioters went on the street, causing damage, vandalizing railways, blocking major roads in order to force the government to answer the demands. Now, don't get me wrong. Peaceful assembly and demonstrations are most welcomed in Hong Kong, where our freedom of expression is being safeguarded by our mini constitution, the Basic Law. It only became a problem when peaceful assemblies escalated into violent ones, where average citizens who disagree with the rioters' demand were basically beaten up, were burned alive, and even stoned to death. Businesses that do not agree with the rioters have petrol bombs thrown at them. So their store got ransacked, got destroyed. The people of Hong Kong lived in fear for almost 1 whole year. And these are the truths, the reality that the Western media are not telling people about. It is really not until the national security law came into force last June, after the enforcement agency is equipped with the legal basis for cracking down on those illegal activities, that our beautiful city slowly went back to its peaceful form. Citizens of Hong Kong now feel safe to go out and not have to worry about being attacked, being hijacked or burned or killed, just because you share a different political stance. And companies now today are free to conduct business without worrying that the political stance will cost them financial losses. So, as a Hong Kong citizen and as an entrepreneur, the national security law has only made our life better. When we take a look at the situation in the United States, the American government adopts a gross double standard in legislation related to national security. When the national security law was enacted in Hong Kong last year, the US took an offensive stance, with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo saying that it has destroyed Hong Kong's autonomy, and then went ahead to impose sanctions on our officials. And yet, if you take a look at America's own legislation, you will find more than 20 pieces of law that are related to national security, including Espionage Act of 1917, the National Security Act of 1947, the Central Intelligence Agency Act of 1949, the Protect America Act of 2007, just to name a few. So why is it okay for the United States to have their own national security laws, but it's not okay for Hong Kong and China to have ours? Is it that only the United States deserves to have their country secured, but not other nations? If you consider the fact that the maximum penalty for violating the security law in Hong Kong is only life imprisonment, while it's death penalty in America, then why is it considered a violation of human rights here in Hong Kong, but not in the United States? And mind you that, the national security law is not the only place where the US government displays the hypocrisy. The Americans also frequently adopt double standards in treating violent protests domestically and overseas, something that our national security law intends to protect us from. Just back in 2 years ago, in 2019, when rioters stormed the legislative body of Hong Kong, causing damage and attacking the police who were completely restrained, the US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi called it a beautiful sight to behold. And yet, on January 6th of this year, when Trump supporters stormed the Capitol Hill in similar fashion, Pelosi called it an assault made on our democracy and an instigation to violence. So how can two events that are so alike of each other generate such a different response from that same person? And how can Pelosi make no comments about Americans' police brutality when the Capitol Police shot and killed a 35-year-old female protester? Her name is Ashley Babbitt, who was unarmed and doing absolutely nothing to threaten the officer at the time. Ladies and gentlemen, if this is not hypocrisy, I don't know what is. When I was studying at Rice University in Houston, Texas, in the US, right? There was this one time where Bill Clinton came on campus to make a speech. And in order to stop protesters from getting close to him, 3-meter tall barricades were set 200 meters away from the venue, surrounding the stadium. Police on horse with guns were patrolling inside the barricaded areas to make sure that no protesters could get even remotely close to Clinton. How is that for upholding the freedom of expression? And how is that for upholding the freedom to peaceful assembly? Here in Hong Kong, our police would have never done the same. In recent years, the American administration has failed in addressing some of the most important issues in their own country. The failure in combating COVID has caused over 600,000 lives to be taken away. And their failure in addressing racial discrimination has led to African Americans being killed by white police and Asian American women being assaulted randomly by Caucasian males. So why is the American government so consumed with legislation in other countries, but fail to make laws that protect minorities in their own country and eliminate racial discrimination? And why is the American government so consumed at supporting rioters overseas, but fail to address the demands of local Americans, leading to local protests like Black Lives Matter? And why is the American government so consumed with interfering with other countries' internal affairs instead of spending time fixing their own? So, American politicians, please mind your own business. Look into your own problems before pointing fingers at others. Because China is no longer the same nation that you bullied 120 years ago. And you have no right, absolutely no right, to speak to us from a position of strength. Thank you.
This opportunity to share with you some of my real personal experiences in 2019. And as a ordinary Hong Kong young person, how I see the future of Hong Kong. When I was a teenager, I moved to Hong Kong from the mainland. It was in Hong Kong where I completed my university studies, got my first job, met my wife, and had 3 lovely kids. I have nothing but love for this city. I love and cherish its diversity, rule of law, freedom, and vibrance. But in the social turmoil that unfolded in 2019, I painfully realized that in the eyes of many self-anointed democracy fighters, people holding different views, people who did not fully agree with them, had no right to comment on the affairs of the city. To them, our freedom of speech did not matter, and we were not qualified to love our own city. I am an ordinary employee at a Hong Kong Public Services company. I am also a professional chartered engineer. One evening of 2019, I was on duty at my workplace, where a series of high-profile altercations and arrests took place. In the aftermath of the violent clashes, rumors began circulating, alleging that the police had killed some of those they had arrested. No photographs, no evidence, no proof, no facts, just rumors. Yet soon, I found myself embroiled in this political storm. Some netizens thought through my personal Facebook, published my name on the internet, and accused me and my colleagues of ostensibly being accomplices in these so-called police murderous actions. I tried to defend myself on social media, pointing out that during the police arrest that evening, many firefighters, ambulance workers, staff of the public facility, and hundreds of public and journalists were on the scenes. Even after the police completed the arrest and closed the facility, the firefighters, ambulance workers, and facility staff remained there throughout the entire event. There was no way to conceal a so-called murder. As for me personally, as a professional with internationally recognized credentials, and as a father of 3 kids, I would never have allowed myself to turn a blind eye to something egregious, to grievous bodily harm, let alone murder. But the facts and details no longer seemed pertinent to the netizens, especially when they discovered I was an immigrant from the mainland. The so-called democracy fighters doxed and harassed me on social media with racist and bigoted tropes. You're not an authentic Hong Konger. Shut up and get out of Hong Kong. You don't belong here, you locust. I had even received death threats directed to my family. I have been living in Hong Kong since I was a teenager. I cannot begin to imagine the kind of slurs they would throw at someone who had recently moved here. I cannot but ask, For whose democratic rights were these people fighting? Did their conception of democracy include folks like me? Or indeed those who abhorred the violence and destruction inflicted on our city? Granted, not all protesters share the same racist and bigoted views. But on the contrary to what some Westerners might think, the bigots were not a small minority, and in fact, they were tactically endorsed by the so-called moderates, those peaceful and nonviolent protesters who refused to criticize the extremists and never sought to distance themselves. As a result, the whole movement was tainted with strong racist undertones. I can't imagine a Hong Kong continuing to descend that way, for that would be a Hong Kong that has no place for people who did not speak the language that the only extremists speak. During that time, my family seriously considered leaving Hong Kong. It isn't difficult for a professional engineer like me to make a decent living in any other part of the world. But the more I saw the social and political division of Hong Kong, the more I grew to cherish and remember fondly the wholesome life that once was in the days prior to 2019. I eventually concluded that no matter its ebbs and flows, I would stay. I would stay with this city, the city I love passionately and dearly. A year had passed, and more ironclad evidences came to reveal that the so-called police murder was completely fabricated. A man whose disappearance around that time had been ostensibly related to the incident emerged. But in a video posted online, he said that he had fled to the United Kingdom 2 weeks before the incident. He did not come out to dispel the rumors sooner, only because he did not want to, in his words, help the police. Several so-called international mainstream media who contributed to the spreading of the rumors quietly changed their wording from citizens in mourning after the deaths of several people to citizens paying ongoing tributes to those injured that night through artwork and flowers. Half these media outlets considered that they owe me and my much maligned colleagues an apology. Half this media delivered the much needed apology to everyone in Hong Kong. I will not put all the blame on my fellow citizens, even those who attacked me with the most despicable of language. Because after all, in 2019, we were all victims. It was the lies, the biased media, and the lack of basic national education that had blinded Hong Kong people for so many years with vigilance and anger. The social and political divisions were so severe that some people turned their dissatisfaction with government policies into hatred against their own fellow citizens holding different views. They forgot that in a truly civil society, we should not hate, we should not discriminate, and we certainly should not assault or attack people for their positions and beliefs. The crazy turmoil in 2019 caused Hong Kong to lose its true freedoms, the freedom to humane, to show compassion, and to respect. Hong Kong deserves love. Hong Kong deserves better. So finally, the central government decided to intervene. And with that, Hong Kong society has been gradually restored to peace and normalcy. With a society free from violent clashes, more and more Hong Kong people started to reflect. We began to reflect on what are the true core values of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is diverse, but we need to be more inclusive and cohesive. We begin to reflect on what true prosperity means. Hong Kong is rich, but we need to fight against the severe income disparity and allow everyone to live with dignity. We began to reflect on what is the true identity of Hong Kong. Hong Kong is, of course, our home, and is, of course, a world city. But fundamentally, Hong Kong is part of China. A few days ago, I read on Nikkei a piece that argued we must readily acknowledge the fact that international lobbying efforts and one-sided criticism of China actually yield zero benefits for Hong Kong. That's very true. The more the international community tries to force the central government's hand, the less likely it is that China and the Chinese people will give in to the outside intervention. In recent years, some people often like to jump out and say that Hong Kong's future is dead. But the future of any city always only counts on those who choose to stay and build. This is a universal fact. So I want to say to those who are still trying to tear apart Hong Kong for their own political gains, you have no right to say that my future is dead. You have no right to assert that our city is dead. You have no right to say that the future of my kids, our next generations, is dead. It's my firm belief that Hong Kong, with its people who truly love it and choose to stay and build, will recover from the haunting years of 2019 and 2020. Hong Kong shall shine again. Thank you.